Welcome to Siskiyou Land Trust Winter Webinar Series. I'm Renee Casterline with SLT, and I am so happy to be here with all of you tonight and super excited to be here with Ari and Alyssa so that we can all hear about their amazing journey last spring. I was just checking in with them before we got started to make sure my memory was correct, because what I remember about the day that they started their trip is that it was snowing, and they set off despite that. And I think we're going to get to hear a lot of fun stories tonight. And with that, I want to just say thank you again for being here. And Ari and Alyssa, I'm going to turn it over to you. We are so looking forward to hearing your story.
Sweet. Thank you, Renee.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. We're stoked to share some tidbits, but also just realize that this is these are just tidbits. You have to stay tuned for the film and the podcast to come. So we hope that this gives you like a really good feel of what we did, but also it's a little bit of a cliffhanger. We're not giving you everything.
Yeah, spoiler, there aren't spoilers. You have to wait for the real thing later on. But we are really grateful to be here with you all, and thank you again for the support throughout the adventure so far. It kind of feels like we're still in the journey, but we're excited to share more about it so far. Okay.
So for those of you that joined us last time we presented with the Land Trust, you've already seen this, but for those of you that are just joining us and are just learning about this journey, the vision was to paddle the entire length of the Sacramento River from source to sea. And what we wanted to do on our journey was to get a better feel for what was happening on the Sacramento River and all the people that were being impacted by it, and really like what the current state of water in California was. And so we felt the best way to do that was to take a really open-minded approach and really practice open-minded listening and just not bringing our personal biases to the table. We just wanted people to feel comfortable to share their stories with us and share their biases with us. And ultimately, we were just trying to collect stories and then in turn create resources that could connect others to the Sacramento River and just be a tool for folks wanting to learn about the river and the drying climate, and also what fun adventure can look like.
So this is us, Alyssa. In the middle is Jamie, who isn't joining us tonight, but who was our third crew member and was really integral, took a lot of the video and audio footage during the trip itself, and then me.
So on March 14th, we began our journey. We started in town because we live in Mount Shasta, and we snowmobiled up to Cliff Lake. And Cliff Lake is one of the three sources for the Sacramento River. It's considered the South Fork of the Sacramento. And we chose that because for winter conditions, it was the easiest to access via the South Fork Road, but also it really is kind of the biggest source of the Sac. The other two forks, the Middle and the North Fork, which all join together before getting to Lake Siskiyou, those two forks are really just springs in the ground in meadows up higher in the Alpine, and they all start around the same elevation. So we felt like starting at Cliff Lake was our best bet for being able to get to the source. And so we snowmobiled into Cliff Lake, and then we skied back down to Lake Siskiyou, and then we inflated our pack rafts and paddled across Lake Siskiyou. And we were met at Box Canyon Dam by a wonderful greeting of folks from our community. And that was like a really amazing way to set off our journey. It was raining and snowing and had a full gamut of conditions, but it was a great way to be sent off on our trip.
Yeah, and so we did most of our trip in pack rafts, which you can see in this lower right-hand photo. And the reason we chose pack rafts, a couple of reasons. They are very durable and similar to inflatable kayaks, but much more lightweight. And so we're able to when we came to places that we needed to portage around, like dams, we were able to deflate them, roll them up to about the size of like your average sized sleeping bag, throw it in our bags, and then walk around whatever we needed to get through. So they made sense, especially for the first portion of our trip, and later downstream, we switched to sea kayaks. So we're going to spend the first part of the presentation just highlighting a few of the key interviews that we had along the way. We met so many amazing folks, but we wanted to spotlight some of the more impactful interviews that also relate to some of the bigger issues on the river. And one of the first ones was with Don Bader, who's the manager of Shasta Dam. And this was a pretty powerful interview for us right off the bat, because again, as Alyssa was saying, a goal of ours was to practice open-minded listening. And I think we went into this interview knowing that we may have some different perspectives on how to manage the Sacramento River when compared to Don. And we really wanted to go in with a lot of curiosity around how he views the Sacramento River and the purpose of Shasta Dam. And I think we came away from it feeling really inspired too, and just connected to the fact that like not everyone shares the same perspective, but that doesn't mean that they don't value the river in a similar way to what we feel. And we were able to have some interesting conversations too, especially around the proposed raising of the dam and bringing in some alternate perspectives. And he was really open to it. And so we're appreciative of the fact that, Don was willing to talk to us and have some hard conversations. And we're excited to share more of those in our podcast and documentary.
So as we got past Shasta Dam and down through Redding, we felt like it was really important to talk to folks that make their living from the river. And the main folks that do that in that area are fishing guides and recreationalists. And so we reached out to, well, actually they reached out to us. Robert Dunn and Maddie Oliva of NorCal Guide Service, and they met us at some like random location on the river and picked us up and in their boat and took us up to the Battle Creek area. And that was a really important piece of that stretch of river, because Battle Creek is one of the last winter
Chinook spawning territories.
Yes. And so it was really interesting to see that area. That's essentially one of the last places where fish naturally spawn in the river. And they just talked to us about what it was like growing up on the river and how they'd seen it change. Robert grew up in Anderson and has spent pretty much his entire life on the Sacramento River, and his perspective of being a kid snorkeling in the river and seeing so much under the water to now as an adult feeling in some regards like underwater is more of a desert. It's barren and there's not great habitat for fish, and just how impactful that has been on his livelihood really, but also just like his mental state as a human, like the river is his home, and how hard it was for him has been for him to see the change. So we're really excited to follow back up with them this winter and see what the Chinook winter, you got it. The Chinook winter run Chinook. This has been a hard one for me all night when we were practicing. What those numbers have been, what the return has been like. They anticipated the numbers being really small for that. And so we're excited to see how that actually turned out. They remained hopeful despite how hopeless it felt at the same time. The numbers of salmon returning each year have been declining, but they still felt hopeful. And they also had like a huge gamut of ideas for how to improve the habitat and to improve the runs. And so we're excited to check back in with them and also to share more of what some of their insight is in the film and the podcast.
Yeah, I think this interview was really powerful for us too. Like Maddie and Robert got pretty emotional about their connection to the river and what they're seeing with the fish runs. And so for us coming in at that time as like not really being anglers to really experience their sadness and pain about the current state of the Sac, it was very impactful.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
yeah, we're excited to share more about that. Further downstream below Red Bluff, we closer to Chico, we got to connect with Grub CSA, which is a community supported agriculture farm. And they invited us to come eat their bountiful spring produce and camp off the river for a day, which was kind of a nice change of pace. And they also helped connect us with Allie Mater's Knight, who is a local Mechoopda Maidu tribal member. She's also a traditional ecological practitioner and has been doing that form of more decolonized restoration for over 20 years. And we were definitely impacted by this interview. It felt like an entirely new perspective on the Sacramento and on management of the Sac. And I think for us, it felt very transformational and eye-opening, and allowed us to definitely feel as though our understanding of the Sacramento is expanding. And so we were really grateful to Allie for taking the time to share some of her traditional knowledge of the Sac with us, and really treat us like family, like sisters. And so she is a wealth of knowledge, and I think that's one of the first interviews that we're really excited to share with everybody.
Yeah, definitely. She was inspiring from beginning to end. Like I think all just felt a little like, whoa, is this really happening? Like it was amazing. So yes, we're excited to share more of that.
Stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. So also in the Chico area is Rancho Llano Seco. So after Grub CSA and meeting with Allie, we got back on the river and traveled, I think, about 15 miles further downriver to Rancho Llano Seco. And Rancho Llano Seco is the oldest Spanish land grant in the state of California, and it was granted before California was even a state. And Charlie Theriot, who is sixth generation like owner and operator of Rancho Llano Seco, his family, the ranch has been in his family's hands essentially from the beginning. There was one other previous owner, but his family has managed the land for the last like 200 years, and they have done their best to preserve the land to its most natural state. So there's massive live oak groves, there's tons of free-flowing water through the property. They haven't levied any of their property or rip-rapped any of it, and they're really proud of the fact that they are practicing low impact agriculture and ranching. So they do as much organic farming as possible, and then they raise cattle and pork, but they do it in as low impact as possible. They try to use as little water as possible, and they're obviously the first water rights holder on the Sacramento, and they don't even use like half of their water allotment each year. And so they are really incredible ranch, and highly recommend checking them out and purchasing some of their meat. Their pork is really well raised and really well done, and they're just really great people and super supportive of what we were doing. We got an awesome tour of the ranch by some of the folks that work there, and really just felt like we were stepping back in time in California, like what California would have looked like before all the levees and the agricultural development. It just felt like true history.
Mm-hmm. We also got to connect with a variety of biologists further downstream, including Flora Cordeleone. And so we stopped by and connected with her in downtown Sac, which was a pretty cool experience. And she's a NOAA fish biologist. So she shared a lot of her knowledge of the work that NOAA is doing, especially in terms of restoration projects on the Sac to support the anadromous fish populations. So those are fish who spend most of their adult life out at sea in the ocean and then come back to spawn on the Sac and on its tributaries. And it was really amazing just to hear her vast knowledge. And also, I think one thing that she shared with us that was really interesting was just her feeling or sense that not a lot of people even know that there are salmon in the Sacramento River.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a big point that she was making is the importance of education around what the Sacramento, in terms of biodiversity, like how important the Sacramento River really is and how many different species it supports. We also got to talk with Jacob Montgomery of Caltrout, and he's done some work with the Nigiri Project, which is a really cutting edge and awesome collaborative project between scientists and farmers, where they're taking rice farmland and using it as rearing habitat for salmonids. And so it's been an interesting project just to see the potential to almost double dip on land in terms of supporting both agriculture and a lot of native species.
So as we moved past Sac and we started feeling the tidal influence from the ocean and the bay, we got into the Delta, and we had a couple really amazing days in the Delta. We ended up taking a couple of layover days, which were the first of our trip. So much needed days of not paddling. We were experiencing incredibly high winds, so we were very happy to be on land for a couple days. We were super privileged to be toured around the Delta by Steve Herringer, who is, I think, 3rd or 4th generation Delta farmer. He owns a winery and a farm and like tons of land in the Delta, and he's a very active community member, as well as Gil Cozio and Emily Pappalardo, who are engineers for MBK. And what MBK does is they are the engineers that essentially keep the levees alive and safe and improved. And really, levees, the Delta wouldn't exist without the levees. But ultimately, I think what we took away most from our time in the Delta was how there are so many different opinions about what the Delta needs. And a big one is the Delta Conveyance Project, which is a state water project that would essentially build tunnels at the north end of the Delta and pump water from the Sacramento River to the San Joaquin farmers, because San Joaquin farmers need water for growing crops just as much as the Sacramento River farmers do. And so the project essentially would pump, I don't even know how much water each year into the San Joaquin Valley, and also down to LA Municipal District. And so one of the things that we heard a lot about in our time in the Delta was about that, people for it, people against it. And ultimately, it's easy to see both sides of the coin. You know, our state is one of the biggest exporters of agriculture products in the world and definitely in the country. And so farmers need water, but the big impact that we kept hearing about over and over was the saltwater intrusion. Essentially what that is the less water, fresh water that's getting pushed downriver to the ocean that gets taken out, more salt water gets to come back up river. So that was a big thing that they were really worried about, was that if the water flow from the river is decreased, more salt water can intrude, and therefore making life in the Delta pretty much uninhabitable. Because already what is happening in the Delta is the islands that make up the Delta have already
subsided. Like close to 10 feet.
Yeah, so they've already subsided. So they're 10 to 20 feet in some areas below sea level. And so there's already saltwater intrusion happening. So just the groundwater is being intruded by saltwater. So those islands that are experiencing that really are uninhabitable at this point. They can't grow food and you can't live on them because, as we all know, you can't drink salt water to survive. So they're really worried that that's going to happen and essentially wipe out the Delta. And a fact that we really didn't know was that the Delta is one of the biggest agricultural zones in the state. And so wiping out the Delta to support another agricultural zone, it's a catch-22. It's really tough. And in addition to that, there are 5th, 6th, 7th generation families living in the Delta. So it's not just wiping out an agricultural zone, it's really wiping out like a huge way of life. And for those of us in the North State, Mount Shasta area, how much we like love and appreciate living here and like the ways that we think it's the best place in the world to live. All the people we talk to in the Delta feel the same way about their home. And we, couldn't quite feel it because we're not from there, but we could feel their love and energy surrounding the Delta. And so it's like, it's so tragic to just think about like wiping out someone's home and way of life just to support agriculture. It's a tough balance. And so our time in the Delta was a mix of like rest, but also like intensity. We were hearing a lot of really powerful stories and talking to some really amazing folks. So that was, I think, maybe one of the more impactful few days of the trip, just in terms of interviews and folks we met. We met so many people. It was like we'd get toured around by Steve and we met like 10 different people in a 6-hour day. It was like everybody wanted to talk to us and share their story. So it was.
Yeah, we got to have dinner with Gil and Emily at Juicy's, which is like a kind of diners, drive-in and dives hangout spot in the heart of the Delta. And it was amazing because as we're sitting at this table having dinner, so many people would come by and they would greet Gil and Emily, and they knew them on a first name basis, and they would ask about their families. And it really does feel like a extended family down there. Everyone knows one another. And so they welcomed us in and we felt very at home while we were there.
Definitely.
And then that brings us to April 3rd. We made it to the Golden Gate. Obviously, there are a lot of things that happened in between, and we'll share a little bit more about them. But those were some of the key interviews.
So along our journey, we obviously dug a lot deeper into what some of the important issues and themes happening on the Sacramento River are, and really with water in California. And ultimately, the main one that we continue to be reminded of is that California's climate is drying. Really, the term drought is no longer a viable way to describe what we're experiencing. You could say we've been in drought for 10 or 20 years in California, but ultimately we are experiencing waves of wetter years and seasons, but the trend is toward a drying climate. And so therefore we need to adapt to that. But in turn, there are a lot of different groups and things that are being impacted by that. And a huge one is fish population. The fish populations are on the decline. The fish habitat is essentially disappearing in some areas. And that's a tough one because fish need water and fish need habitat, but without the water, it's hard to have the habitat. So it's, again, another catch-22 in turn, really with all of the populations that are being impacted, such as agriculture. It's a very vulnerable population, and we need agriculture. Obviously, we all need to eat, but they're currently getting a huge share of water. And so it's like, how do we balance how much water they're getting versus how much water fish are getting? And then municipalities, water from the Sacramento River goes all across the state, not just in the North State. A lot of water from the Sacramento River ends up in LA. And so they're also an important stakeholder. Humans need water too. But ultimately, what we discovered is that there's not enough water to go around. And that's tough because really the only way to work through that issue is compromise and collaboration and figuring out how each of those groups, environment, agriculture, and humans, can share the water that we do have. But despite all of that, there is still a lot of hope. People definitely feel hopeful for collaboration. I don't think anybody feels like we're gonna get more water. But I think everyone does feel like there's a way forward for all of those groups to continue to
Share what we have.
Yeah.
So our personal learnings and takeaways, I think after completing this trip, we really feel how important and meaningful the Sacramento River is to so many folks. We knew that going into this project, but it means something different to us on this end of it after having met them firsthand and talked with them and heard their stories. And I think it says a lot about how important it is to put faces to the issues that we're talking about, whether it's the Sacramento or climate change or anything really, is just taking the time to understand that there are real people behind the issues. And so that's what we're really excited to share with folks with our documentary and our podcast. Another takeaway is that the issues are really complex. Like Alyssa was alluding to, there's no silver bullet fix. None of these issues are going to go away anytime soon. And there's a lot of history. There's a lot of, I'd say, rooted biases and animosity between different stakeholders that new leadership is trying to overcome. And yeah, there's just not enough water. And so I think the main thing that we heard related to hope is that there's more possibility for collaboration. That was a word that we heard over and over again, is like, we need to collaborate. And that's what we want to follow up on, is like, what does collaboration really look like to these folks? And understanding how we do that. One thing we did notice though is that local communities do have a lot of power when they come together. That was so apparent in the Delta, but even just in the Angler community or the scientific community, it's like when people are passionate and they come together around an issue, there's momentum, there's possibility for change. And so again, that's something that we're wanting to really highlight through our project, is getting people to connect with one another around what inspires them around the SAC so that they can take action, meaningful action. And given that meaningful action, we feel like, having grown up at the headwaters of Sacramento, we're so privileged, we're at the source where there's ample water. And certainly the further downstream we got, the less water there was and the more people who were relying on that resource. And so given our position of power, we feel like it's important to do what we can to raise awareness around the SAC and, like we said, get more people connected. This last one, Liz and I were talking about this the other day. Like, I think if we knew what we knew now, I don't know if we would have been as gung-ho to jump into this project, because it really has taken on a life of its own. And the journey didn't end on April 3rd. Like, we are still working hard. We're still connecting. We're still gathering resources. And all that said, maybe how naive we were at the beginning is a gift, because we're doing it. Like, we're still here. It's taking longer than we thought, but we're invested and we're going to see it through to the end. And that was something that we thought about a lot on this river trip, is like, we paddled a lot of flat water, and flat water is pretty uninspiring and hard on your body and hard on your mental state. But we kept going, and that's what we're trying to do right now. Like, we're still paddling through the levees and the underscores of like how hard this project has been. But your all's support and I I think the momentum you have behind our vision keeps us going, and we really are dedicated to following through on what we set out to do.
So with that, what we're currently doing and what some of our future goals are, we're currently working with Pusher. Bridget and Drew with Pusher are fantastic humans and really amazing friends, and they are helping us get a podcast going, and they're also helping with the final editing of the documentary. And they're going to help us with follow-up interviews this December. Some of the folks that we talked about checking back in with, we're going to go talk to those folks. And then there's a few other folks that we didn't get to connect with on the pre-trip and during the trip that we still really want to talk to and hear their stories. So we're going to keep collecting info. We're hoping for spring of 2022 for the film and the podcast. And then future goals, because we've had that question before, what's next? Possibly a source to sea after the dams come out on the Klamath River. But maybe with like a little more whitewater and a few less interviews.
TBD. So yeah, we wanted to just now transition into a few of the more lighthearted moments of our trip. And as you can see from these photos, the trip itself was gorgeous. We had a lot of bird wildlife, especially including a lot of close encounters with owls, which was really special. We got to paddle this section above Red Bluff that we had never really heard of called Iron Canyon. And it's a gorgeous stretch of whitewater. So if you're ever in that area, we highly recommend it. Jelly's Ferry to Red Bluff, essentially.
It's incredible. And it was an amazing surprise too. We really didn't know what to expect for most of it, but I would say that was probably one of our favorite stretches. It feels pretty remote at times. And if you do that stretch, there's what looks to be an amazing campsite in the middle of Iron Canyon, river right on the inside of the bend. Looks like a great sandy beach.
After the notable rapid.
After the one notable rapid. And you're a couple miles from Red Bluff. So that would be an incredible float. Just really, really beautiful.
Yeah, just another way to connect with the Sac. We also had close encounters with freight boats and freight ships and ferry boats in the bay. We got to hang out on Angel Island for a day. And some gorgeous sunsets.
One of our notable big days at the beginning of the trip was our Triple Dam Day. It was the 4th day of our trip. We woke up in the middle of Shasta Lake. So if you were following our live map, it looked like we were sleeping in the middle of the lake, just because the lake was so low, but we were really on this little spit that came off the shore. And it was an incredible campsite. But we woke that day to what we thought would be the biggest day of the trip, but it turned out not to be. It was just gradually building each day, really. But we paddled, I think maybe 8 miles over to Shasta Dam. And the picture on the bottom right is Ari and I basically totally de-rigging our stuff, packing it all up into our backpacks. And then the picture in the top right is the 3 of us on top of Shasta Dam. We, I think, wanted to get a selfie with the security guard, but he was not into that, but he did take a picture of us. But that was a big portage. We, I think, walked maybe 3 miles with 60 pounds on our backs, down to Keswick Reservoir, which ended up being incredibly long and flat. We thought there would be some current after Shasta Dam, but there wasn't. It was just immediately another lake. And Keswick is really beautiful. There's tons of wildlife and birds, but it's not a place that we would recommend pack rafting. And then we got to Keswick Dam, And there was this like really gracious human who was, I think, worked for Pacific Power. Maybe he drove us around Keswick Dam to put in back on the Sac. And then we had about 4 miles from below Keswick Dam down to the acid diversion dam, which is the Anderson Cottonwood Irrigation District. And that's basically in Caldwell Park, right in Reading. And so that was a pretty easy portage. We just carried our boats around. And then we ended that day at the Sheridan with the mayor of Reading and some of the other local officials.
District 1 supervisor.
They took us out to dinner at Mosaic, which was a pleasant meal and surprise. We were only 4 days in and we felt like we traveled much further than we had, but it had been raining, it had been really cold, and we felt like rock stars in Reading, really.
It was a gift.
It was a gift.
These are just a few silly moments. Yeah, we started the trip on a silly note in a way, just with how little snow we had, and so had to do some carries on our ski down from Cliff Lake. We also acquired a mascot that we named Manager. He kept us in check. He was our turtle from Turtle Bay down in Reading. There was a pie fight or pie throw on our first day because it was Pie Day, which is Jamie's favorite holiday. And then really special, I got to celebrate my 29th birthday on this trip and pop some bubbly on Angel Island while eating fancy mac and cheese with dried morel mushrooms. So that was a high. It's a good moment. We even tried our hand at sailing.
Oh yeah.
Things you do on flat water.
We definitely spent more time rigging that sail up than the amount of time we actually got to benefit from it, but we did get to benefit from it, and we did sail for maybe like a minute and a half.
Yeah.
And it was epic. It was like the only downriver wind we really had. But then me and my injuries, if you were following along on the Instagram, you probably observed this, but I apparently am prone to injuries. And our second day on the water, I swam a rapid and got like a super gnarly knee bruise. So upper right picture, that was like slightly debilitating for a couple days. Like it hurt to take my shoes off and walk a bit. And then a couple more days in, there's no picture of this, but I did have a video I wasn't able to upload of Ari and Jamie towing me for about 10 miles one day because I got super gnarly tendonitis in my wrists and I like literally could not paddle. And then like maybe a week and a half into the trip, I got really bad cellulitis on my toe and my toe was super infected. So shout out to Nate Parker and my dad for hooking it up with some antibiotics in Calusa. And then in Sacramento at the Sacramento River Yacht Club, I got a splinter in my heel that was like 1.5 inches long. And
the final piece was removed on the day before we ended the trip.
At Angel Island.
And it really did part of the trip with us.
It really was like, no joke, like the fisherman thing. It was this big. No, but it was really this big. I'm not joking. In my heel. So that's a big theme of our trip.
Maybe another takeaway is don't run on docks barefoot.
Yes, definitely.
You might be wondering what we ate on the trip. So we were trying to do a lot of lightweight dehydrated food augmented with not lightweight things like blocks of cheese and
avocado
stick and avocado. But this was our lunch, just your average river lunch.
It's really good.
And our breakfast.
Okay, go.
Welcome to Cafe Sacramento. We have all the best latest trends when it comes to delicious breakfasts. Like our superfood oatmeal bowl, complete with flax seeds, goldfish, omega-rich avocado, and sausage, and a hint of sweet. Over here, we have our Riverside latte with coconut milk powder. Just shake it and froth.
So yeah, we pretty much ate the same thing every day for breakfast and lunch. A lot of hard-boiled eggs and meat stick and cheese and avocado, either in a tortilla or on oatmeal. It kept us going, and you can understand why we were so excited when people invited us out to dinner.
Okay, go.
Oh,
Okay, go.
right. Your average.
So if you are familiar with the Pacific Crest Trail or other major through hikes, there's a thing called Trail Magic where people leave like food or snacks or treats along the trail to support the hikers. And we really felt like we got that on this trip as well. We started calling it River Magic. We were greeted by friends, and random folks too, but mostly friends and family, with beers and kombuchas and pizza and snacks and barbecue. We really felt loved and supported, and like what we were doing was worth it.
And it really did feel like we couldn't have done this without our community, both our immediate community and then the folks that continued to join our community as we flowed downstream. So big shout out to Kathy at Delta Kayak Adventures. She loaned us 3 sea kayaks to complete the final stretch of our journey. So that was absolutely integral to us finishing on a sane note. Also shout out to Rivers for Change. They supplied us with a generous grant for our Source to Sea project, as well as the many people who we met along the way that provided us meals, showers, laundry, warm places to lie down at the end of the day and decompress. So we just feel immensely grateful to everyone who contributed and helped get us downstream.
And really, this is just like the list of official sponsors and partners, but the gratitude goes out to all the folks who supported us with our GoFundMe. And we really could not have done it without all of you. With that being said, we are still fundraising to support the costs of the film and podcast, and to support the Karen Project, which is a nonprofit that supports getting women and girls outside through various different projects across the country. So from the beginning, we've been an ambassador for them and hope to give them a sizable donation towards the end of the project to just support other women getting outside.
Yeah, so thank you for your support, and we still need it. Hit us with some questions. We are so excited to hear what you're curious about, what you want to hear more about in the podcast and the documentary, what's sparking your interest, and how can we answer your questions.
Thanks, ladies. That was so fun. I love the balance that you provided. Storytelling at the end, and then just really sharing so much about what you learned and where you developed your curiosity as you traveled down the river and talked with people. I mean, I think that that's the part of the storytelling that I'm really looking forward to. Although your effort at sailing was really fun too. I hope you have a longer section of video. The full minute and a half. So we do have some questions in the chat, and I'll go through and start reading those. And I want to encourage all of the rest of you who are here to give us some more questions, or just give them some love too, because there's a lot of love in the chat. I could see you guys taking a look at it. So we'll start off with that earliest question from Linda Stremmel. How did you connect with the folks along the way, and did you research before the trip?
Yeah, such a good question. I'd say it was a mix. We did a lot of work on the front end to network with folks that we knew we wanted to interview and hear their stories. But then a lot of people reached out to us organically through either our social media, or they were following our live map and they wanted to just connect with us as we were passing through their communities. So I'd say, yeah, half of it happened on the front end and half of it happened very much in the moment and through community networking too.
All right, nice. Well, I'm going to ask you guys some questions while I wait to see if others come in. One of the things that I noticed last year when you did the webinar for us, and then even as you guys were out, this source to sea, that's a thing, right? I mean, there are people doing it on other rivers, and now you guys are thinking about doing it on the Klamath after dam removal, which is a fun idea. But can you give us a sense for like the idea behind source to sea, or sort of, what brought you to it, and what it, if what you did is different in any way from other source to sea paddles?
Well, I think the idea behind a source to sea really comes from just like having a love of a river and wanting to see its entirety. And I think for me, the idea of wanting to do a source to sea was inspired by seeing folks doing source to seas on like the Colorado, like the green to the Colorado, and starting up high in the Wind River Range or whatever, like those are such inspiring stories to see that, and feeling like, well, I don't really have much of a connection to that river other than like, it would be cool to do that. But feeling like if I were to ever do a source to sea, I would want it to be meaningful to my life and like the life that I've been leading. And I grew up in Mount Shasta and have spent a lot of time on the Sac, and so is Ari. And so it felt like this was a river that we could really connect to and already knew pretty well. So I think just wanting to get a deeper sense of what the whole river looks like, and then wanting to share what that meant. Like, not all source to seas do, make a film and like interview folks and just like dig deeper into what the river really is. And that felt important to us.
Yeah, I think a lot of source to seas choose rivers that are a little bit more exciting in terms of whitewater than the Sac. And that's part of what makes our project unique, is like the focus wasn't necessarily on the adventure. It was really on the stories and the people along the way.
Nice, thanks. And before I move on to other questions, you guys have a good connection with the Klamath also. Like there are sections you spend time on.
Yeah. I would say that's in some ways my other home river.
Yeah. Probably, honestly, in some ways have spent more time on the Klamath because we can guide on the Klamath pretty much all summer, whereas the Sac has always been, it's like this like short-lived like little blip, and you're so lucky if you get it every year, and sometimes you don't. But the Klamath is like, this like long-standing relationship. Like it's like the Sac is a fling, and you're just like lucky if you get to spend time with that person because you love them. But then the Klamath is like, this is your like long-standing relationship. They're going to be with you through and through. And I think so probably know the Klamath better in a lot of regards.
Yeah.
All right, and given that, was there a section on the Sac that was too low for you to paddle?
Yeah, it was a mix of too low at that time of the year, and then also really hazardous conditions given the snow that we had. We had planned on putting on below Box Canyon Dam to do the full stretch of the river, but it's a very steep and hazardous put in, and we really felt like that was an unnecessary risk on our part to try and put in given the conditions. So we have actually been monitoring river levels this fall and have been like waiting for a good window. It might happen in the spring, but we do want to complete that stretch from Box Canyon Dam down to Sims.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, and Miles asks, how did the scope of your project grow and change as you continued down the river?
Hey, Miles. Thanks for the question. I mean, it changed a lot from when Alyssa and I first started talking about it in the fall, because that was more of this like excited, organic, let's do a source to sea on the Sac. And then we started talking about, how can we make it more than just us floating the Sac? How can we make this meaningful to people outside of our immediate circles? And that's where the idea of doing more of a documentary and interviewing folks and collecting stories really came from. I don't know if you want to speak to where we are now.
Yeah, I would say that at this point, things have shifted in terms of our perspective, maybe on like even just our interview questions. You know, when we were interviewing folks on the river, we like kind of laid out, these are the things that we want to ask. And now, you know, more than half a year later, we were like, are those questions still relevant? And like, what are the follow-up questions we can ask to these people? And how can we dig deeper into some of these interviews? And I think we still very much feel like we are on an open-minded journey with the folks that we're interviewing, but I think we have a better idea of like, what are the things that we really want to know, and like, not to set aside our open-mindedness and like bring in our biases, but just more like directed kind of investigative questions of like, how do we get a little more info rather than just like asking, well, what does the river mean to you? Because it turns out that question is really hard for people to answer. And how can you describe the river in a couple words? Like we had some incredible responses to that, but that's also really hard for people to answer. So I think what we really discovered is that like, it's a lot more like we mentioned throughout the webinar, it's a lot more complex. And like, I think just wanting to be able to dig a little bit deeper into those complexities and really like bring forward a story that is more than just 3 women paddling the river, like really bring forward what's actually going on.
All right, thanks. Okay, and so from Heather, she writes, I've been thinking recently about the power of bringing joy into conservation and climate work to help combat the attitude of despair. Can you speak to the joy that you get from the river and how folks responded to that aspect in particular? And do you think it changed how you were received or how folks interacted with you?
Such a great question, Heather. Yeah, I mean, I think that almost did surprise us, was how we've alluded to it, like the hope, but also just the joy of connecting to this powerful resource that was so present throughout the journey. And so I think what we're hoping to highlight in our film and in the podcast is the importance of connecting and finding joy in these places that matter to us. Because if we resort to despair, which is very real, you know, like we are in a shifting environment that has a lot of daily and seasonal reminders of what we're losing, it's easy to feel hopeless and to succumb to despair. And I think the playfulness of a river is a really good anecdote in some ways to that despair. Like there's so much life in a river especially when it's well cared for. There's the life that you experience moving through it and that you witness on its shores and in its waters, and that it supports on the larger landscape as well. And so I think just like remembering what the river really signifies. A lot of people talk about rivers as like the arteries of our earth, and how they pump fresh water, which is the life force for all of existence. And I think it's hard not to feel joyful when you think of the life-giving power that rivers have, and just balancing that with the sadness around what's happening to a lot of our rivers. And so yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we were doing this as both an educational journey, but also as just like a fun adventure did change how people interacted with us. And the fact that we were floating on the Sac in the midst of a pandemic, and you know, a lot of people hadn't interacted with folks outside of their immediate circle. There was a lot of joy and excitement around just human connection, and that definitely contributed to how people received us. So I hope that answers your question. There was like a mix for sure, but the joy and the hope seems so important in terms of continuing to have forward momentum, because without that, we just get eddied out.
All right, well, then we'll move on to the next question from Raven. How has this journey inspired you to care for our source water?
Oh, I mean, I think even more, like we mentioned in the film, or not in the film, sorry, in the webinar, that we feel such privilege to live at the source. And I think that, like, growing up here, it's easy to lose sight of how lucky we are, just because it's always just been, you know, you turn on the tap and you have clean water. But then seeing the stark difference of moving downriver, you know, the majority of places that we traveled through, we didn't want to drink the tap water. And it was like really tough to just drink the water that we were able to get in general. And so it was just like a daily reminder of how lucky we were. And so then when we'd have resupplies, we'd ask for those folks to bring us fresh water from home, because the folks giving us resupplies were coming from Shasta. And so I think just ultimately, it definitely feels like a renewed, or not even renewed, but just like an inspired feeling of wanting to protect our source water. And I think we're both really open to how we can help with that and do that. So if folks are involved with some of the different projects going on in our area to protect our source water, like, please reach out to us, because I think we both know that we don't know everything and would love to get involved and use our small platform that we've created and our voices to really protect our area as well.
All right, thanks. I know there is a question in the feed about what people, someone asking, what would you recommend, what actions to take? And so it sounds like maybe what the work here and the opportunity is that, community can share, and through your platform, you can share back with us.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's a place where we can find some connection.
Yeah, 100%. Like, we want to, like Alyssa said, we want to use our platform to uplift any community actions that are taking place that promote good stewardship of the Sacramento River. And I think we'd also just encourage folks to seek out more local opportunities to get involved, because as we said, it really feels like there's a lot of power in local movements, and these more grassroots efforts can then have an amplified effect when it comes to more of our state level and federal level projects and funding. But it really does feel like so much of the initial energy gets incubated on a local level. So try starting local first and then expanding.
Nice, thank you. Okay, Linda asks if you heard any interest in using rainwater harvesting on buildings to solve our water issues.
That's such an interesting question. I don't think we encountered that on this trip. We'd be happy to dive into that more. And share more resources, especially if you have any, Linda. But it wasn't really something that got talked about much on our trip.
But with that being said, we recognize that there were gaps and are gaps in all the folks that we talked to. We tried to reach out to as broad of a scope of folks as possible, but we're just a small crew of folks doing this. So there's a lot going on that we don't even know about. And so if there are things that are going on that any of you guys know about, we're definitely still really open to connections.
All right. Okay, so here's a question from Kathleen. What was the most surprising discovery about yourselves along this journey?
That's such a great question.
I know I've contemplated this since the trip.
I think it was maybe not a new discovery, but a rediscovering of what motivates me. And a lot of it is just human connection. Especially after the pandemic, it was so refreshing to get to like talk with strangers and to feel the generosity of a total stranger. Like that's so powerful and storytelling. So I feel like it was maybe an exclamation point or emphasis on something I knew about myself, but want to now continue to keep bringing into my life, is like this emphasis on human connection and on creating space for people to share and to tell their stories.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And also, I think like part of the way that I've like gotten self-validation over the last like probably 10 years is through like big adventures and like kind of like epics and like really like exciting things. And this is that, but in a different way. Whereas like, you know, normally I am feeling that self-validation through like summiting a mountain and skiing down, or like going really fast on my mountain bike through the trees, or paddling like class 4 or 5 water. And so I think one of the things that I realized was that like I've been getting my validation through like accomplishing these like epic adventures and like getting all this adrenaline, but that this was like a much slower paced adventure. And while it was still a very big adventure, we were gone for a long time, that it wasn't as like fast paced and as intense as I'm used to, but it still fulfilled that part of me that really needs to be like just out in the world doing things and seeing new things. And so it gave me a shift of perspective from like needing it to be like epic and fast and like adrenaline filling to just like generally seeing the world and meeting people and, like Ari said, making connections, and just that it doesn't have to be like this big epic thing to still feel really fulfilling and really worthwhile. And that
it kind of redefines what adventure means in some ways.
Yeah, like it still is very much an adventure. So I don't want to downplay that like spending 21 days on a river is not an adventure, because it is. It was just like, it was a shift for me. I've spent a lot of time like trying to just send it harder, like everything just go hard. And this was not that. And that was good for me in a lot of respects, because I spent most of 2020 hurt in some way. I got hurt a lot. Then this trip was kind of like a little cap to that. And so after 2020, I was like, I don't want to get hurt as much. So maybe what that means is that my adventures don't need to be as like grand and fast and exciting. And I still like doing that, but
I think we also learned that an adventure of this scale can also be equally hard. Like Alyssa and I have both talked about the fact that even though we've done some pretty quote unquote epic things, this is maybe the hardest thing that we've ever physically and mentally taken on. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also humbling.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thanks for that sharing. That's good stuff. So another question from Toby, in addition to financial contributions, how else can we support your project?
Yeah, I mean, I think stay connected with us on our social media and keep spreading our updates and our mission. I think someone asked, like, is our podcast out yet? And no, it's not. The podcast and film will be coming out hopefully sometime in the spring. And so please just like be patient with us and stick with us, because we are working hard on some really awesome things. And the more you stay connected with us, that amplifies our reach and our ability to get more people connected with the SAC. So spread the word for us, tell your friends, help us expand the SAC community.
And in addition to that, just like being patient, as like, I'm sure we can all like feel and acknowledge, is that like the last 2 years have been pretty tough. But we are still very committed to it, but life has happened. And so some of our like plans for progress have been slowed, but we do still plan to update our website with resources from all the folks that we talk to. So we're still hoping that our website can become a little bit of a hub for interacting and engaging with the folks that we did meet along the way. So yeah, stay patient, but yeah, just
Stick with us.
Stick with us, spread the word.
And did I see that you have a name for the podcast? Was that on one of the slides or?
No, not yet. We've been throwing that around a lot. So we'll leave you on a cliffhanger. We don't have a name yet.
All right. Well, I've got some questions for you from Andrew. Which interview most influenced your personal opinions on river management on the Sacramento? And additionally, you spoke to trying to be open-minded during interviews. Did you have preconceived notions of your values, what you hope to get out of the interviews, and a picture you wanted to paint, so to speak?
Yeah, really great questions. I mean, I think for me, the interview that felt the most powerful or like, again, shifted my perspective the most was the one with Allie Mater's Night, because I feel like that traditional ecological knowledge and that view on restoration is new to me. Like I don't have very much experience with it. And so it felt in some ways like radical, but in a good way, in terms of flipping the script on what I knew to be restoration. And in terms of the trying to be open-minded during interviews, I think before the trip, we did check in a lot about like, what are our biases? Like, what are we coming into this project with? What are some of our notions and strong convictions around how the SAC should be managed and what needs to happen on the Sacramento River? And we would often like try and be really upfront with people we were talking to about where we were coming from so that they knew, but then also say like, our goal is to not have what we're bringing completely influence the space of storytelling. Like we want this to feel like a safe space to tell us what's important to you and what you feel. And so the goal behind that was to try and create a space that felt really open for folks to share things, especially things that maybe felt contradictory or not as in alignment with our personal views that we were coming to the table with.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that the majority of folks that we talked to didn't feel like we might be trying to paint a certain picture about them, but there were certain folks that we did feel it was really important to say like, hey, we are not trying to vilify you based on like maybe your previous experience with documentarians. Like we really just want to hear your story, because I think in the environmental world, it's common at this point to put out films that do really like paint a picture about a certain issue, which I think is important in some regards because it helps us understand a certain issue that's going on. But I think what we really realized is that like there's no one side to any issue. And so those films that are out there, you know, a lot of them are really well done, but like that doesn't tell the whole story about all the stakeholders. And the folks oftentimes that are like getting placed on the bad side are like just doing what they think is right as well. And so I think it's what we really realized is so important is that like, just because like there's this strong opinion on one side that like this is the right and this is the wrong way to do things, that like on the flip side, it's the same, those people on the other side feel the same way. And so they feel that what they're doing is really important as well. And so, yeah, I think we did a good job of not polarizing anybody. And,
yeah. Oh, sorry.
And that being said, some of the biases that I had going into the trip have strengthened. I won't say that didn't happen. But I still am gonna try to help paint the most unbiased picture as possible. And but personally, some of my biases have grown or strengthened.
I think going back to the theme that we've talked about of like collaboration, part of our goal of being open-minded was recognizing that whether it's in environmental management or politics or anything in life right now, in order to collaborate, you have to keep an open mind around where the other person is coming from. And so we saw a real opportunity to try and use our trip and the film and the podcast as a way to like get more people in that space of hearing different perspectives so that they then could like make an informed opinion and take action from there, rather than maybe just relying on like the echo chambers of their immediate communities.
Well, thanks you guys for that thoughtful response. It's clear it's something that you spent time thinking about right before the trip, and even now as you're working through the material and thinking about what you want to do next. So we've got another question, and then I think what I'm going to do is go through the chat section and just read out all the love that's there. So the last question then, were you able to gain a fish's perspective on the various water quality, quantity, and impediments to free passage?
I would say as pretty close as possible. I think where we experienced that the most was going like south of Calusa. Basically, the river turns into a canal and it's just leveed on both sides. And there's very little riparian habitat. And what happens when a river becomes a canal is it just becomes like this deep channel, and there's no rapids, and there's no like shallow gravel bars, and there's no log jams or really things in the river to create habitat. And so I think we really felt like we're just like in the doldrums. This is just never ending. And like, we're just in the levees. And so I think that's about as close as we could get to feeling like what a fish is going through now, partly because like the canal essentially creates one consistent flow in the river, and a natural river has like varying flows as it moves downstream. You know, there's eddies and there's currents and there's holes that all like break up the speed of the river, and therefore like creating little pockets for fish to hang out and to spawn and to just like catch a breath as they're moving around. And when there's just a consistent canal for like 200 miles, there's no catching a breath, and there's no like pockets of safety. And so therefore it's really hard for fish to move upriver, and that's why the salmon populations have decreased. Part of why the salmon populations have decreased so much. So I think we definitely felt a really strong sense of like the reality of the river when we were down in the Central Valley is like, it's dire for sure. And like Robert Dunn said, it's kind of like a desert under the water at this point. There are still fish there, but it's not a great place for them to live anymore.
So ladies, I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for caring the way you do and connecting the way that you have, and for being here with us tonight to keep telling your story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here tonight and for the ongoing support. And stay tuned. Spring 2022. That's the goal.
All right. Well, with that, everyone, I want to say good night. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again on December 7th for John Muir Laws. And happy holidays.
Woo.